Perfect. Good morning, everyone. My name is Hugo. We'll be talking a little bit today, on the Chugh University about diversity visas, reentry permits, as well as SB-1 visas. So today's presenters will be Lihua, myself, Hugo, and Harleen. I'll be presenting on the diversity visas. Harleen will speak a little bit about the reentry permits, and Lihua will speak a little bit about the SB-1. Perfect. So let's get started with the diversity visa. What is a diversity visa? A diversity visa was actually a program created in the 1990s, in 1990s by Congress, in an effort to promote more immigration from countries that are underrepresented. Originally, when it started, there was a limitation of 55,000 visas available per year. For whatever reason, though, since the year 2000, Congress has actually reduced this cap to 50,000. And they're actually calling this a temporary reduction. So hopefully one day it'll go back to the 55,000. But as of now, it's been capped at 50,000, available diversity visas. So just quick things about the diversity visa. The diversity visa program is actually administered by the Department of State when you're applying abroad. For those individuals that apply for the diversity visa in the United States, then USCIS will, handle those adjudications. And one last quick point about the diversity visa. They're similar actually to how this year's H-1B cap ran, in that they're actually selected in the lottery. So it's not sort of application based to begin with. You actually start off by submitting through a lottery. Now remember, just because you get selected in the lottery doesn't necessarily guarantee admission into the United States. It simply means that now you're able to apply, or you're granted the opportunity to apply for the diversity. So again, remember, just because you're selected doesn't mean that you're granted diversity. So who's eligible for a diversity visa? There's a couple of requirements, to keep in mind when you're applying for the diversity visa. Number one, as mentioned before, this was in an effort to promote, more diversity within underrepresented or low admission countries. And low admission countries is just defined as any country with 50,000 natives or less, admitted into the United States within the previous 5 years. So that's actually one of the qualifications of the diversity visa. Just make sure you're from one of the qualifying countries. These countries are actually grouped into 6 geographical regions. The 6 geographical regions are Europe, Africa, Asia, Oceania, North America, and then the last and sixth category is actually bunched up. So it would be consisting of South America, the Caribbean, and Central America. As well as being from an eligible country, you have to have either a high school equivalent, a high school education equivalent, or at least 2 years of recent qualifying experience. And anyone who's married to the spouse or the applicant, they have to be from the native country as well, that from the qualifying country. So those are just some of the criterias, for the diversity visa. Finally, the last thing is that diversity visas, as I mentioned, they're usually a lottery. So for each diversity visa period, there's actually an allotted time frame where you can apply. So you just have to make sure you apply within the appropriate time frame. And as mentioned before, you're from the eligible country, and you have either a high school equivalent or recent work experience to qualify for a diversity visa. So it's fairly simple qualification. So, what security measures are in place for the diversity visa? Just a couple of things to keep in mind. This is a pretty extensive visa to apply for, in that if you do get selected, you will have to go through, extensive criminal and security background checks, a lot of biometrics, medical appointments with doctors, in-person interviews. So it's pretty extensive, in terms of what they're looking for, and how extensive the process actually is. So that, that's just a couple things to keep in mind. And again, as mentioned before, this is a lottery. So again, just because you're selected doesn't mean you're guaranteed. So if you do get selected, you want to make sure that you provide all the necessary things and go through all the necessary procedures to ensure that you're granted it, because being selected again randomly is the chances are very slim. So just make sure we go through all the procedures properly. And this next slide, I know it's a little bit blurry, but these are just a list of some of the eligible countries for the diversity visas within the 6 categories. So if you can kind of see, but if you notice, there's a couple of major countries sort of missing from this list, namely Mexico, India, China. And the reason is because, as stated before, the purpose of this program was to diversify, the immigrants here in the U.S. And we actually, get a lot of immigrant applications and non-immigrant applications for, nationals from China, Mexico, India. So that's one of the reasons why those aren't, qualifying countries. But this is just the list of the countries, so you guys could take a look at it briefly. So now we'll get into the actual steps for the diversity visa. So as I stated before, you actually apply and you get selected through a lottery. So the first step is actually applying electronically online by completing a form known as DS-5501. This is basic information, basic bio information, your first and last name, date of birth, country of birth, if you have high school education, just sort of basic things. As I mentioned before, typically the application period is set. I believe last year, or typically it's between October through November, so you have a 1-month period, to complete this DS-5501. After you complete, the DS-5501, then throughout the year they'll go through, the selection process. You actually won't be notified until the following year, starting maybe May or June of the following year, whether your diversity visa electronic entry was sort of selected. Now, keep in mind that you won't get a mail, a letter in the mail or anything like that notifying you of your selection. You can actually only check on the electronic website online. And another thing you also have to keep in mind is, once you complete the DS-5501, you will be given a confirmation number at the very end. So make sure you keep that somewhere safe where you won't lose it. They actually won't resend you a confirmation number. They won't reassign you a confirmation number. So, if you lose the confirmation number, you're in sort of big trouble, and that it's going to be very, very, very difficult to continue the process without that confirmation number. So just keep that in mind. And so what's the next step? If you're selected, there's a couple things to keep in mind. So the first thing you're going to want to do is determine whether you're in the U.S. or abroad, because as stated before, different government entities handle different, diversity visa applications. As stated before, if you're applying for the diversity visa in the States, then the Department of State handles that. And if you're applying abroad, then USCIS handles that. So just make sure that you're aware of where you're at in the process, whether you're in the U.S. or abroad, and that'll help you determine what the following processes are for that. If you're abroad, the next step would be, after you're selected, is to complete the DS-260. You make sure you complete the DS-260 so that you can eventually get your interview at the appropriate embassy or consulate. So again, just keep that in mind. If that's if you're in the U.S. or abroad when applying for the diversity visa, so just make sure you keep that in mind. Perfect. So now we get to the point where if you're selected, once you complete your DS-260, you just want to make sure that you have all your qualifications in order. Make sure that you didn't just apply for the diversity visa, because it looked fun. You have to make sure you have the qualifying requirements. As stated before, the high school equivalent, high school education or equivalent, 2 years of qualifying work experience. Make sure that you're from an eligible country. Um, if you go down to EFG, you'll notice a website titled ONET. So that's sort of what USCIS goes based off when determining jobs and job classifications and things like that. That's how essentially you would be able to determine whether your work experience qualifies or it doesn't. Similar to the education, high school education, just make sure that it equates to a U.S. equivalent of a high school education, and you should be okay. So now we get to submitting your immigrant visa and alien registration application. So once you submit the DS-260, you have to make sure that everything is in order, meaning if you're applying for any family members, make sure you list them on the DS-260. Just because if you fail to list them or you improperly list your family members, that's going to create issues for you moving forward in the process. Now, there are certain exceptions, such as if your family circumstances changed after you actually applied for the electronic application, the DS-5501. After you applied for that, and if you say got married or had a child, then you can actually add them to your application. But if you forgot to add them to begin with, then you can't go back to re-add them. So just keep that in mind. Make sure you're inputting all the correct and complete information when you do fill this out. Another thing to keep in mind is at the very end, once you get your confirmation number from the DS-5501, you have to actually input that in the DS-260 at the final page once you sign. So just make sure, again, you keep that confirmation number because it's very, very, very important. Once you complete the DS-260 online, just make sure you print the confirmation page because you'll actually have to take that to the interview. And then just another thing, I guess, to keep in mind is the KCC won't tell you, if you've been selected or if you haven't been selected. They'll just tell you if your application has been processed or if your form has been processed. So that's, just one thing to keep in mind. Okay. And so how do we submit supporting documents? Once you file your DS-260 online and as I said, you include all your family members, you'll actually receive instructions on how to submit your supporting documents. And supporting documents are going to be, marriage certificates, birth certificates, translations if needed, education documents, passport, things like that. So all of that will have to be actually submitted after you complete the DS-260, but before your interview. Actually, they won't set an interview unless they've reviewed the document. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Just make sure that you do provide all the proper documentation. Yeah, perfect. And so once you get to the interview process, just make sure that all the people listed on the DS-260 go to the interview. If you list family members and they don't go, they'll be ineligible. So just make sure that everyone that's listed on the DS-260 makes it. Okay, and then also another thing to keep in mind, you actually won't be scheduled an interview unless there's a visa number available for you. As stated before, there's only a limit of 55,000 as of recent 50,000 visa applications. So you actually won't be scheduled an interview unless there's a visa number available to you. So that's another thing to keep in mind. As stated before, there's 55,000 only allocators. So unless there's a visa number available, you won't be scheduled your interview. And then this is just a couple things that you can do to prepare for your interview. First and foremost, check the e-website, the entry website where you filled out your DS-5501, because that's actually where you'll be notified of the interview date, time, location. As stated before, they won't send you an email, they won't send you mail notification. You can only check on the electronic application status online. So that would be the first thing. Just make sure you're aware of the date and time of your visa interview. Secondly, would be to review the U.S. and U.S. Embassy or consulate interview instructions. Different embassies and different consulates, maybe have different instructions or specific instructions as to how they like doing things. So just make sure you read that carefully and you're aware of how they like to do their interviews. Number three, you have to schedule and complete a medical examination. We'll get a little bit more into detail with that, but you do have to complete your examination before your interview. Again, we'll get into details shortly. Gathering all your documents. So all the documents that you emailed or you submitted, for them to review to actually grant you the interview, you have to make sure you gather all the original copies so you can take them with you to your interview. And lastly, just review any additional information. Again, different embassies and consulates have different, specific instructions. So just make sure you're, sort of aware of their instructions and things. Perfect. So again, just revisiting, just check the entry website online. Again, that's actually the only way you'll notify if you've been selected from the lottery. That's the only way you'll be notified if you have an interview. So just make sure you keep that in mind. That's actually the only way. So don't wait for any emails and letters in the mail or emails. Secondly, again, just review the U.S. Embassy or consulate interview instructions. Again, they might be different for different consulates, so just make sure you're aware of that. So the process can go as smoothly as possible. As mentioned, we have to schedule and complete a medical interview. So this is actually, you can find the list of approved physicians, online on the USCIS website. They'll have a list of approved physicians, close to you or whatever the case is, but you have to schedule a medical appointment with one of their approved physicians. Once your medical appointment once your medical exam is complete, they'll give you your results in a sealed envelope. Make sure you don't break the seal because that's actually going directly to the embassy or the consulate. Some physicians will send it or will mail it directly to the consulate, but for the most part, they'll give you a sealed envelope. So again, just make sure you don't break that seal. Again, so, you just have to gather all the requiring documents, all the originals of the stuff you already scanned to KCC to grant you the interview. You just have to make sure you get the originals, as stated before, passports, marriage certificates, education documents. Of course, you would have to take your, a printout of your DS-260 confirmation page, a printout of the interview appointment page from the EDV website. You'll have to bring in 2 photos. So just make sure you have all the originals of all the documents so that they can review that. And finally, again, just reviewing the embassy or consulate's website to see if they have any specific instructions. Such as paying the fees. You actually have to pay the fee before your interview. Some consulates do it different, wherein they want you to pay before you actually even go to your interview date. Some, collect the fees at the time of your interview. So just make sure you look at the different consulates and how they, sort of, work on their processes, and you're fully aware of that. And the final step. So applicant interview. Just like I said before, make sure that all the people that were listed on the DV application on DS-260 go to the interview. Make sure your spouse is with you, your children. As stated before, there's a lot of biometrics and things that are taken. So in the interview, don't be surprised if they take your fingerprints and things like that. But yeah, just be aware of who you included on the application. They have to go to the interview. What to bring to the interview? Excuse me. So as mentioned before, you gathering all your originals of all your documents. So that's essentially what you would need to take. All the originals of your documents, your passports, things like that. The medical examination, sealed, of course, you'll have to take that as well. As mentioned before, some of them mail it. So if they mail it, don't worry about it. But if they give it to you sealed, make sure you bring that to your interview. Make sure you print out the DS-260 confirmation page, the appointment letter from the electronic diversity visa website. things like that. Another quick thing to keep in mind, if your documents are sort of in your native language, it's always advisable to get English translations for them, just to make it easier on the officer, to make the process a lot smoother. And then of course, paying your fees, the appropriate fees. Perfect. So what happens after the interview? The officer will inform you, whether your visa was approved or denied. If your visa was approved, they'll actually inform you how and when your passport and visa will be returned to you. If your visa was denied, they'll most likely let you know why your visa was denied. Some actually require additional processing, so that might be a reason. But for the most part, they'll actually let you know why they denied, your visa, so you won't be, completely in the dark with that. So what will happen when you receive your approval is you'll get your passport with your visa, your diversity visa approval with its validity period. So just make sure that when you're coming into the United States, you're coming in before the expiration of the visa. We don't want an issue where you come in and the visa's already expired and you're trying to come in. So just make sure you come in before the expiration of the visa. Another thing that will happen is you will actually receive the sealed packet containing all the documents that you provided. So make sure, again, you don't break the seal on the packet, so that when you do come in, you provide them, that sealed packet at the port of entry. Yeah, and of course, all the medical records and things like that. So you'll have to provide all of that at the port of entry. Well. Perfect. So once you're admitted, once you pass, CBP, the port of entry, then you'll enter as what's known as a lawful permanent resident, also known as a green card holder. And you'll be permanent. You'll be able to permanently live and work, here in the United States. So that's the basics of the diversity visa, so to speak. I guess. If we can change the slide, Jacob, please. So I just want to finish off just really quickly with, as I mentioned earlier, there was two types of things that you should look out for when you get selected for a diversity visa. Number one would be, if you're abroad. Number two is if you're in the United States. So this slide sort of shows us how to go about it if you were selected while in the United States. So this sort of works a little bit similar to the employment-based adjustment of status, in that you'll have to check for the visa bulletin. You'll have to check monthly for the visa bulletin. Now, the only difference is that, for employment-based visas, you're looking at cutoff dates, or you're looking at when your priority date will become current. For diversity visas, you're actually looking at cutoff number. So as I mentioned before, there's a certain number of diversity visas allotted per year. So you're actually going to look at your native country and the cutoff number for that country. So as long as the cutoff number isn't below yours, then you should be able to apply for the adjustment of status while in the United States if you were selected for the diversity visa. And just a couple of things to I guess keep in mind when you're submitting or when you're applying for the adjustment of status while in the United States through the diversity visa. As mentioned, it sort of works like the employment-based adjustment of status, where you have to file a I-485. So those are essentially the two ways in which, or the two things to look out for when you're selected for a diversity visa. And like I said, this is just if you were selected while in the United States. So I hope you guys got a little bit. And with that, I'll hand it over to Harleen, who'll speak a little bit about reentry permits and what they are. Harleen?
Thank you, Hugo. Thank you. Thanks, Jacob. So to start with, what is a reentry permit? A reentry permit allows a lawful permanent resident or a conditional permanent resident to apply for admissions to the United States upon returning from abroad during a permit's validity without a need to apply to obtain a returning visa from a U.S. Embassy consulate. A lawful permanent resident normally may travel outside the U.S. and return. but there are some limitations, and a re-entry permit can help prevent those two types of problems which a person may face. One could be that your permanent resident card becomes technically invalid for re-entry into the United States if you're absent from the US for at least 1 year or more. So if you were thinking that your stay may not exceed 1 year, you don't need to really apply for a re-entry permit. So the other one is that your US permanent resident may be considered as abandoned for any absentees that you have, which is shorter than a year, if you take up a residence in another country. What is a re-entry permit continued? If a re-entry permit establishes that you did not intend to abandon your status, and it allows you to apply for admission to the United States after traveling abroad for up to 2 years without having to obtain a re-entry, a returning resident visa, and a re-entry permit are normally valid for 2 years from the date of its issuance. A re-entry permit generally is not extended. So, I mean, in the usual terms that we use, but if it expires, you just need to apply for a new one. However, you can apply for a new re-entry permit because your previous one was lost, stolen, or destroyed. But that you need to indicate in your application when you apply for the new permit. Next slide. If you are in the States as a lawful permanent resident or a conditional permanent resident, you may apply for a re-entry permit. But the key here is that you must be physically present in the US when you file for the re-entry permit application. And you need to complete your biometric service requirement. So technically, after you file for your application for a re-entry permit, the USCIS will inform you in writing that when to go to your local application support center for your biometrics. The key here to note is that if you do not attend your biometric service, it will result in a denial of your applications. We face a couple of cases like that, so it's really important that you inform all your clients about it. One may travel outside the US after the biometric appointments are done, and the re-entry permit can be usually sent to the US Embassy or the consulate or the DHS office abroad, and you can just pick it up. But you need to make such a request when you file for an application. An absence from the US for 1 year or more will generally break the continuity of your required continuous residence for the purpose of nationalization. So that's another key that you may want to bring up to the notice of all your clients, that eventually if they do want to apply for nationalization through either regular or if through conditional, this time outside would just break their continuity if it's more than a year. Validity of the re-entry permit. Generally, a re-entry permit is issued to a lawful permanent resident is valid up to 2 years from the date of its issuance. However, if you've been outside the US for more than 4 of the last 5 years since becoming a lawful permanent resident, the permit may be limited to 1 year. But there's certain exceptions to this, which is one, a lawful permanent resident whose travel is on the order of the US government, a lawful permanent resident employed by the public international organization of which US is a member by treaty or by statute. A conditional permanent resident is valid for 2 years from the date of his issuance or to the date of the conditional lawful permanent resident who is a professional athlete and regularly competes in the US or worldwide. Also to notice, a re-entry permit issued to a permanent resident must apply for a removal of conditions on his or her status, whichever date comes first. The usual documents that we really need for the re-entry permit would be the front and the back of the form I-551, which in layman's language is a green card copy. Copy of your green card, sorry. If you, and the second is that if you have not received your form yet, if the card yet, a copy of the biographic pages of your passport and a visa, which shows your initial admission with a stamp, that could suffice. And also a copy of your approval notice of the application for the replacement of your 551, which is a regular receipt number or anything which just proves that you have a permanent residence here. In certain cases, even if it's not approved, but you file for an extension, something like for conditional cases, a receipt notice is also accepted. Re-entry permit, there are options, and we've requested certain times for an expedited request. To request expedited processing of an application for a re-entry permit for an individual outside the US, type the word expedite in the top right corner of the application in black ink. I would also highlight it actually. The USCIS recommends that you provide an email address, a fax number with any expedited request for a re-entry permit document. Also, you need to include a written explanation for the reason of requesting for an expedited process. Of course, the burden of proof is on the applicant to demonstrate that what is the reason, and certain criteria which are considered as expedited would be severe financial loss to the company or the individual. There's a very emergency situation, maybe personal or professional. Humanitarian grants and non-profit status of requesting organization in furtherance of the cultural and social interests of the United States, Department of Defense, or national interest situation. But just please note that this must come from the US government if you're requesting for the point number 4. That's a brief about re-entry permit. I'll just hand it over to Lihua.
Okay, let's talk about SB-1 returning resident visa. According to the U.S. immigration law, a green card holder, including a lawful permanent resident or conditional resident, who does not have a valid reentry permit and who remained outside the U.S. for longer than 1 year will not be allowed to enter the U.S. again, as the green card is considered to be abandoned. In such cases, the green card holder needs to initiate a brand new green card application process to obtain a new immigrant visa to enter the U.S. Or if applicable, the green card holder can apply for SB-1 visa, a returning resident visa, to enter the U.S. So this visa is applied at the nearest U.S. embassy or consulate. It is a two-step procedure application. First, the applicant will submit the application and will be interviewed for the application for the returning resident status, and then they can apply for the immigrant visa. There's an exception for this, abandonment. The spouse and or child of a member of the U.S. Armed Forces or a civilian employee of the U.S. government stationed abroad on official orders, they can still use an expired permanent resident card to enter the U.S. As long as they have not abandoned the lawful permanent resident status. And at the same time, and the spouse and or the parent is returning to the U.S. So that's one exception. In order to qualify for returning resident status, there are 3 conditions. First is that the applicant had the status of lawful permanent resident at the time of departure from the U.S. So when you depart U.S., you need to be on the lawful permanent status, resident status. And when the applicant departed from the U.S., they had the intention of returning to the U.S. And also they didn't plan to abandon their green card. And the other condition is that they are returning to the U.S. from a temporary visit abroad, and the stay abroad, or if the stay abroad was protracted, this was caused by reasons beyond the applicant's control and for which the applicant was not responsible. So usually these are extraordinary circumstances. The Department of State visa officer, during the interview, they will focus on this part. Application procedure. So the applicant need contact the nearest U.S. embassy or consulate in advance of intended travel. Well, the suggestion is that 3 months in advance, but the earlier the better during the current situation. So to permit sufficient time for the for the visa interview to be arranged and to be processed. And also for this kind of application, the status, the returning resident status application, an interview is required. you need to read the specific country and consulate instruction and information on their website where you will apply. And for Indian nationals, they need to apply it either at the U.S. Embassy in New Delhi or the U.S. Consulate in Mumbai. And they need to, and also they need to schedule the interview using Category 2 appointment slot. So usually the consulate or embassy will require the following documents. The first one is the most important one is the DS-117. It's an application to determine returning resident status. It's not a long form. It looks very simple, but you need to put other reasons very carefully on the form, and also need to provide your PR card. And if you have a reentry permit, and you need to submit as well, and also need to submit the supporting document, including the travel documents. For example, when you depart the U.S., you need to provide the airline ticket, the passport stamp. You enter for example, you enter India, and there's a passport stamp on it. And also, the most important thing is that, or the third one is the most important thing. Excuse me. And the second one is a proof of ties. You need to prove that you didn't plan to abandon your permanent resident status, and by doing that, you need to show your ties to the U.S. and also your intention to return. For example, you file your tax returns. That is always required because as a permanent resident, you're supposed to file tax return on all the income, on all your income received around the world, and also you can submit the utility bills, the bank statement, and attending meetings remotely. For example, you cannot go back, but you are attending your company's meetings and all other community activities. Those are the supportive evidence, and also other evidence of economic, family, and social ties to the U.S. And the third one is the proof that protracted stay outside the U.S. was for the reason beyond the applicant control. This is the most important part. During the interview, the officer will ask questions on this part, and will focus on this part actually. So usually the reasons, are medical reasons. We have some. We see some cases that, for the elder, applicants, they were sick and they could not travel, and they were under the medical treatment until they are okay to travel, and those cases, and also some cases it's like they are employed with a U.S. company. Yeah. So the applicant just need to explain what kind of circumstances he or she has. So this is purely out of his or her control. So he cannot come back to U.S. within 1 year or within the reentry permit validity date. Yeah. So after, if if the U.S. consulate or embassy approves the returning resident status, then they will provide the applicant with specific instruction for the remainder of the process for the SB-1 immigrant visa application. And usually the applicant is required to apply for an immigrant visa within 6 months from the date of the approval. While exact instructions are different by different embassies, while the instructions, exact instructions are different among these consulates, generally speaking, this will be usually it will require. The instruction will include instruction on the medical examination. They will provide a list of required vaccination. And also they will provide instructions on the interview and ask you to bring the related documents. And the list of the document will include the DS-260, the immigrant visa and any registry, which is used in all like immigrant visa application almost. And the second is provide your original passport and the 2 passport size photos. And the list of the civil document which the consulate or the embassy requires. And we suggest that if you apply for SB-1 visa, you really need to go to the consulate or embassy where you apply to check all the detailed information. Because this is kind of a visa that, the documents are similar. The document required are similar, but not exactly the same according to different consulate or embassies. So if the returning resident status application is approved, and also the visa, the S1B visa interview goes smoothly, the consulate usually will put a new I-551 step in the passport, which allows the applicant to travel back to US. If denied, the applicant will need to apply for green card application from beginning if the applicant is still eligible to obtain one again. And in reality, some people didn't apply for SB-1 visa, and they just tried to enter the US. Some of them entered without, they entered not without any problem, but they were placed in secondary inspection and being asked, and they provide documents, and the CBP officer let them in. Some of them were placed in removal proceeding if they did not sign the form I-407, like a record of abandonment of lawful resident status. But even for those people who were admitted, there's a risk that later the government will make a determination that the applicant has abandoned PR status before and initiate a removal proceeding. So these are the things need to be noticed. So basically that's it. That's the introduction of this SB-1 visa. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody, and I hope you enjoyed today's seminar. Thank you and have a good day.